Abandoned puppy follows a man home. Their friendship will melt your heart. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun was setting over the quiet neighborhood, casting long shadows across the empty sidewalks. Henry adjusted the strap of his work bag as he walked home, his steps slow and deliberate. It had been another long day at the office, the kind of day that drained him both physically and mentally. His tie was loosened, and his thoughts were already on the leftover pasta waiting for him in the fridge. The street was unusually silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the warm evening breeze. Henry liked this time of day, the calm after the chaos. But tonight, something felt different. As he turned the corner onto his street, a soft sound caught his attention. A faint whimper. Henry stopped in his tracks, his brow furrowing as he scanned the area. First, he saw nothing. The street was empty, lined with parked cars and the occasional flower bed. But then, near the base of a tree, he spotted it. A small, scruffy puppy, sitting alone on the curb. The puppy's fur was matted, and its thin frame suggested it hadn't eaten in days. Its eyes, wide and nervous, locked onto Henry's. It didn't bark or move, just sat there, watching him with a mix of fear and curiosity. Henry's heart clenched. He wasn't the kind of person who often stopped to notice things like this. His life was orderly, predictable, but there was something about the puppy's quiet desperation that made him pause. He took a step closer, crouching slightly. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice gentle. The puppy flinched but didn't run. Its ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Henry glanced around, looking for any sign of an owner. A leash, a collar, someone calling out for their lost pet. But the street was empty. "Where's your family?" he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. The puppy didn't answer, of course. It simply sat there, its small body trembling slightly. Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't a dog person, and his small apartment wasn't exactly pet-friendly. But leaving the puppy here, alone and scared, didn't feel right either. After a moment, he stood and started walking again, deciding it wasn't his problem. He had enough on his plate without adding a stray dog to the mix. But as he moved down the street, he heard the soft pitter-patter of tiny paws behind him. He turned, and there it was, the puppy, following him at a cautious distance. Every time he stopped, the puppy froze, its big eyes watching him intently. When he started walking again, the puppy followed, staying just far enough away to feel safe. Henry sighed, shaking his head. "What are you doing, huh? You think I'm gonna take you home?" The puppy didn't respond, of course. It just kept following, its small tail wagging faintly. By the time Henry reached his front door, the puppy was still there, sitting on the sidewalk a few feet away. It looked up at him, its ears perked, as if waiting for an invitation. Henry stared at it for a long moment. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he muttered. He glanced at the sky, which was quickly darkening. Leaving the puppy outside didn't feel right. Not with the cool night air settling in and no guarantee it would find its way home. With a heavy sigh, Henry opened the door and stepped inside. "All right," he called over his shoulder. "You can come in. But just for tonight." The puppy hesitated for a moment before trotting up the steps and into the house. Its small paws clicked softly against the hardwood floor as it looked around, sniffing at the air. Henry closed the door behind it, wondering what he had just gotten himself into. Henry set out a bowl of water and an old towel in the corner of the living room. The puppy approached cautiously, its nose twitching as it sniffed the offerings. It lapped at the water, its small body visibly relaxing as it drank. "There you go," Henry said, watching from the couch. "Make yourself at home." The puppy finished drinking and turned its attention to the towel, circling it a few times before curling up into a tiny ball. Its eyes flicked to Henry briefly before closing, its body rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Henry leaned back, letting out a long sigh. Just one night, he reminded himself. That's all. But as he watched the puppy sleep, its small frame tucked tightly into itself, something inside him softened. He didn't know where the puppy had come from or what its story was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it had been meant to find him. The next morning, Henry woke to the sound of soft whines. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, looking around. The puppy was sitting by the couch, its tail wagging slightly as it looked up at him. "Morning, buddy," Henry muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the couch. The puppy let out a small yip, its excitement palpable. Henry couldn't help but smile. "You're hungry, huh?" He rummaged through his kitchen cabinets, eventually finding a box of plain oatmeal. "This'll have to do," he said, preparing a small bowl. The puppy devoured it eagerly, its tail wagging furiously. After breakfast, Henry decided to take the puppy for a walk. He didn't have a leash, so he improvised with an old scarf. The puppy trotted alongside him, its small paws patting against the pavement. As they walked, Henry posted a few pictures of the puppy on social media, asking if anyone in the neighborhood recognized it. He also stopped by a few nearby houses, showing the photos to neighbors and asking if they knew where the puppy might belong. But no one had seen it before. By the time they returned home, Henry was no closer to finding the puppy's owner. He sat on the porch steps, the puppy curling up beside him. "Looks like you're stuck with me for now," he said, scratching behind its ears. The puppy closed its eyes, leaning into his touch. Over the next few days, Henry found himself adjusting to life with the puppy. He bought proper food, a leash, and a small bed for it to sleep in. The puppy, in turn, seemed to thrive under his care. His coat grew shinier, its energy returning in full force. It followed Henry everywhere, its small tail wagging constantly. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Henry looked at the puppy and smiled. "You need a name," he said. "How about Scout? You seem like an explorer." The puppy barked as if in agreement. Henry laughed, ruffling its fur. "Scout it is." Scout quickly became the center of Henry's world. Its playful antics brought a lightness to his days that he hadn't realized he was missing. The once quiet evenings in his apartment were now filled with the sound of Scout's paws skittering across the floor, its joyful barks echoing off the walls. Henry's reserved nature began to soften, his bond with Scout opening him up in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself looking forward to their walks, to the way Scout would greet him at the door after work, its tail wagging so hard it looked like it might fall off. In Scout, Henry had found something he hadn't known he was looking for: a companion, a friend. And in Henry, Scout had found a home. As the days turned into weeks, Henry and Scout's bond grew deeper. Scout had become a constant presence in Henry's life, filling the once quiet apartment with joy and energy. It was impossible for Henry to imagine his life without the scrappy little dog that had followed him home on that fateful evening. Scout's personality began to shine through more and more with each passing day. He was curious and adventurous, always poking his nose into every corner of the apartment, and his playful antics kept Henry laughing. Whether it was chasing after a rogue sock or pouncing on a squeaky toy, Scout had a knack for turning even the most mundane moments into something special. One Saturday morning, Henry decided it was time to take Scout to the park for the first time. He figured the puppy could use some open space to burn off its endless energy, and he could use the fresh air himself. With Scout's new leash in hand, Henry led him down the sidewalk, the little dog prancing happily by his side. When they arrived at the park, Scout's excitement was palpable. His tail wagged furiously as he took in the sights, sounds, and smells of the bustling green space. Children played on the swings, joggers passed by with earbuds in, and other dogs bounded across the grass. Scout's ears perked up at every sound, his wide eyes darting from one thing to the next. "All right, buddy," Henry said, kneeling down to unclip Scout's leash. "Go explore." Scout took off like a shot, his small legs carrying him across the grass with surprising speed. He darted between bushes, sniffed at flowers, and even tried to chase a butterfly that fluttered just out of reach. Henry watched from a nearby bench, a smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly at ease. As Scout played, a woman walking a golden retriever approached. She smiled at Henry, her gaze flicking to Scout as the little dog bounded up to her. "Is he yours?" she asked, kneeling to pet Scout. "He's adorable." "Yeah, he's mine," Henry replied, standing and joining her. "His name's Scout. He kind of adopted me a few weeks ago." The woman laughed. "Looks like you've got a loyal friend there." Henry nodded, glancing down at Scout as the puppy wagged his tail, clearly enjoying the attention. "Yeah, he's something special." The woman introduced herself as Emily, and they struck up a conversation about their dogs. As they talked, Scout and Emily's golden retriever, Daisy, played together, their tails wagging in perfect harmony. Henry couldn't help but notice how natural it felt to talk to Emily, as though Scout had somehow opened a door to a part of his life he hadn't even realized was missing. Over the next few weeks, Henry and Scout returned to the park regularly, and it wasn't long before the duo became a familiar sight to the other parkgoers. Scout had a knack for making friends, both human and canine, and his joyful spirit seemed to draw people in. For Henry, the park became more than just a place to walk Scout. It became a sanctuary, a space where he could connect with others and leave behind the stress of his day-to-day life. One afternoon, as Henry sat on a bench watching Scout chase a tennis ball, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a call from someone he didn't recognize. Frowning, he answered. "Hello. Hi, is this Henry?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name's Rick. I saw your post about a lost puppy. I think the dog might be mine." Henry's stomach dropped. He had all but given up hope of finding Scout's previous owner. And now, weeks later, someone was calling out of the blue. "You're Scout's owner?" he asked, his tone guarded. "I think so," Rick replied. "I lost a puppy a while back. It looks just like the one in your photos." Henry's mind raced. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about Rick's tone didn't sit right with him. "Can you tell me about the dog?" he asked. "What breed is he? Does he have any distinguishing features?" Rick hesitated for a moment before answering. He's a mutt. Small, brown fur. That's about all I remember." Henry's suspicion deepened. If Rick truly was Scout's owner, he should have been able to describe him in more detail. "Do you have any pictures of him?" Henry asked. "Anything to prove he's yours?" "I don't," Rick admitted, his tone defensive. "But I know he's mine. I want him back." Henry clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the phone. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to need more proof than that. Scout's been with me for weeks now, and I've taken care of him like he's my own. If you can't prove he's yours, I'm not handing him over." Rick's voice grew angrier. "Look, I don't have to prove anything. That's my dog, and I want him back." Henry's heart pounded as Scout trotted over, dropping the tennis ball at his feet. He looked down at the puppy, who stared up at him with trusting eyes, completely unaware of the conversation. Henry took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "I'm sorry, Rick," he said firmly. "If you can't provide proof, Scout stays with me." End of discussion. Before Rick could respond, Henry hung up. He slipped his phone back into his pocket, his hands trembling slightly. The thought of losing Scout, of having him taken away by someone who might not have his best interests at heart, was unbearable. Henry knelt down and scratched behind Scout's ears, his voice soft. "Don't worry, buddy. You're not going anywhere." The encounter with Rick lingered in Henry's mind for days. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that Rick's interest in Scout wasn't entirely genuine. To protect Scout, Henry decided to take extra precautions. He had a microchip implanted at the vet, officially registering Scout under his name, and even invested in a secure ID tag for his collar. Scout, oblivious to the turmoil, continued to bring light and laughter into Henry's life. Whether it was greeting him at the door after a long day or curling up beside him on the couch, Scout had a way of making everything feel a little bit better. And for Henry, that was enough. One evening, as they sat together watching a movie, Henry found himself reflecting on how much had changed since Scout had come into his life. The once lonely apartment was now filled with warmth and companionship. Scout had not only given Henry a friend, but had also reminded him of the simple joys in life. The wag of a tail, the comfort of a quiet moment shared. A few weeks later, Henry received another unexpected call. This time from Emily, the woman he had met at the park. She invited him to a community dog event, a fundraiser for the local animal shelter. Henry hesitated for a moment before agreeing. He wasn't usually one for social gatherings, but Scout's wagging tail and excited barks made the decision easier. The event was a bustling affair, with booths selling treats, games for the dogs, and plenty of opportunities to meet other pet owners. Scout quickly became the center of attention, his friendly nature winning over everyone he met. Emily and Daisy joined them, and the four of them spent the afternoon exploring the event together. As the day went on, Henry found himself laughing more than he had in years. He realized that Scout hadn't just brought him companionship, he had brought him back to life. The walls Henry had built around himself were beginning to crumble, and he owed it all to the little puppy who had followed him home that evening. By the time they left the event, Henry felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in a long time. Scout trotted beside him, his tail wagging happily as they walked back to the apartment. Henry looked down at the puppy, a smile tugging at his lips. "You really are something special, Scout," he said softly. "I don't know how I got so lucky." Scout barked in response, as if to say the feeling was mutual. The weeks following the community dog event brought a sense of routine and joy to Henry's life that he hadn't experienced in years. Scout had fully integrated into his world, becoming a fixture not just in his home but also in the neighborhood. People recognized them during their walks, stopping to greet Scout, who never failed to wag his tail enthusiastically. Henry, once reserved and quiet, found himself chatting with neighbors he barely knew, thanks to Scout's charm. Despite the lingering memory of Rick's phone call, Henry felt a growing sense of security. Scout was his, officially registered and microchipped, and the thought of losing him seemed less daunting now. Still, Henry couldn't completely let his guard down. He had heard stories of people going to great lengths to reclaim animals, and he wasn't willing to take any chances. One breezy Saturday morning, Henry decided to take Scout to the farmer's market downtown. The market was bustling with vendors selling fresh produce, handmade crafts, and baked goods. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and warm pastries, and Scout's nose twitched excitedly as he took in the scents. Henry held Scout's leash firmly as they weaved through the crowd. The little dog drew smiles and attention wherever he went, his wagging tail and friendly demeanor making him an instant favorite. Vendors leaned over their booths to pet him, and children giggled as he sniffed at their shoes. As Henry browsed a stall selling fresh herbs, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Well, if it isn't Scout." He turned to see Emily and Daisy approaching, both looking as cheerful as ever. Emily held a bag of fresh peaches in one hand and Daisy's leash in the other. Scout barked happily, his tail wagging furiously as he greeted his new friend. "Fancy seeing you here," Emily said with a smile. "Scout looks like he's enjoying himself." "He's in his element," Henry replied, chuckling. "I think he's sniffed every booth twice." They spent the rest of the morning wandering the market together, chatting and sharing laughs as their dogs played. Emily told Henry about her work as a graphic designer, and Henry shared a bit about his job in logistics. It was easy conversation, the kind that felt natural and unforced. At one point, Emily turned to Henry with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I was thinking, Scout's such a social dog. Have you ever considered training him as a therapy dog?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "A therapy dog?" "Yeah," Emily said, nodding. "Dogs like Scout are perfect for visiting hospitals, nursing homes, or schools. They bring comfort to people who need it most." Henry glanced down at Scout, who was now sitting patiently at his feet. His ears perked. The idea had never crossed his mind, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Scout had a way of brightening everyone's day, and Henry couldn't think of a better way to channel that energy. "I'll look into it," he said finally, a small smile on his face. "Thanks for the idea," Emily smiled back. "I think you two would be great at it." That evening, Henry did some research on therapy dog training programs. He learned about the requirements, the certifications, and the commitment involved. It was a lot to take in, but the thought of Scout bringing joy to others filled him with a sense of purpose. Over the next few weeks, Henry began working with Scout on basic commands and socialization exercises. They attended a local obedience class, where Scout quickly became the star pupil. The The little dog's eagerness to learn and his natural friendliness made him a favorite among the trainers and other pet owners. Henry found himself growing more and more proud of Scout with each passing day. The once-abandoned puppy had transformed into a confident, happy companion, and Henry couldn't wait to see what they could accomplish together. One afternoon, as Henry and Scout were practicing commands in the park, a figure approached them. At first, Henry didn't recognize him, but as the man drew closer, his heart sank. It was Rick. "Henry, right?" Rick said, stopping a few feet away. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it. Henry stood, keeping a firm grip on Scout's leash. "What do you want?" Rick's eyes flicked to Scout, who was sitting obediently at Henry's side. "I want my dog back." Henry's jaw tightened. "Scout isn't your dog. You couldn't even describe him when you called me." Rick scoffed. "I didn't have to. I know he's mine." Henry shook his head, his voice firm. "Scout is registered to me. He's microchipped. If you want to take this further, you'll have to go through the proper channels." Rick's expression darkened. "You think a piece of paper changes the fact that he's mine?" Henry's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. "Scout was abandoned. I've given him a home, and I'm not letting you take him away." For a moment, Rick seemed to consider his options. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders tense. Henry watched him go, his grip on Scout's leash tightening. He didn't know if Rick would pursue the matter further, but he was determined to protect Scout no matter what. The encounter with Rick left Henry shaken, but it also strengthened his resolve. He contacted an attorney to discuss his rights as Scout's legal owner and made sure all of Scout's documentation was in order. He wasn't taking any chances. Meanwhile, Scout continued to thrive. They completed their obedience training and began working on the skills needed for therapy dog certification. Scout excelled at every task, his natural kindness and intelligence shining through. By the time they passed their final evaluation, Henry couldn't have been prouder. Scout was officially a certified therapy dog, ready to bring comfort and joy to those who needed it most. Their first visit was to a local nursing home. As they entered the building, Henry felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He wasn't sure how Scout would react to the new environment, but as soon as they walked into the common room, his doubts vanished. Scout's tail wagged as he approached the residents, who lit up at the sight of him. He moved from person to person, offering sniffs and gentle nudges, his big brown eyes filled with warmth. Laughter and chatter filled the room as Scout worked his magic, and Henry couldn't help but smile. One elderly woman, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, reached out a trembling hand as Scout approached. "What's his name?" she asked softly. "Scout," Henry said, kneeling beside her. She stroked Scout's fur, her eyes filling with tears. "He reminds me of the dog I had when I was younger. Thank you for bringing him here." Henry felt a lump in his throat as he watched Scout rest his head on the woman's lap. In that moment, he realized just how much of an impact Scout could have. Not just on him, but on everyone he met. As the weeks went on, Henry and Scout visited more places. Schools, hospitals, community centers. Everywhere they went, Scout brought smiles and laughter, his gentle spirit touching the lives of everyone he encountered. For Henry, the experience was transformative. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man with an ordinary life, but Scout had shown him that even small acts of kindness could make a world of difference. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Henry looked at Scout and smiled. "You've changed everything, you know that?" he said softly. Scout barked, his tail wagging as he nuzzled Henry's hand. "Yeah," Henry said, scratching behind his ears. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm glad you found me." Scout curled up beside him, his head resting on Henry's lap. And as the quiet warmth of the evening wrapped around them, Henry knew that their journey was just beginning. As the months passed, Henry and Scout's bond grew even stronger. Their visits to schools, hospitals, and nursing homes became a weekly ritual, and each time, Henry witnessed Scout's unique ability to bring light into people's lives. It amazed him how much the once-abandoned puppy had grown. Not just physically, but emotionally. Scout had gone from a timid, scruffy dog on the street to a confident, loving companion with a purpose. Henry found himself changed as well. The quiet, routine life he had once lived felt like a distant memory. Scout had opened up a world of connection, pushing Henry out of his comfort zone and teaching him to appreciate the small joys in life. It was hard to believe how much had shifted in just a few short months. One sunny afternoon, Henry and Scout were invited to a local elementary school as part of a program to encourage children to read. Scout was the star attraction, sitting patiently as children took turns reading books aloud to him. His calm, attentive demeanor made the kids feel at ease, and their laughter filled the room. One little boy named Max caught Henry's attention. Max was shy, barely speaking above a whisper, and he hesitated before approaching Scout. When it was his turn, Max sat cross-legged on the floor, clutching a well-worn copy of a children's book. Scout lay down beside him, resting his head on the boy's lap. Max began to read, his voice shaky at first. But as he continued, he gained confidence, encouraged by Scout's quiet presence. By the end of the session, Max was smiling, his shyness momentarily forgotten. Afterward, Max's teacher pulled Henry aside. "You have no idea what this means to him," she said. "Max struggles with anxiety, but today he opened up in a way I've never seen before." "Thank you." Henry felt a surge of pride as he looked over at Scout, who was now surrounded by a group of children petting him and giggling. "It's all him," Henry said with a smile. "Scout has a way of making people feel safe." While life with Scout was filled with joy and purpose, the shadow of Rick's earlier confrontation still lingered in Henry's mind. He hadn't seen or heard from Rick since their encounter in the park, but the memory of it left him wary. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that Rick might resurface, and he remained vigilant, always keeping a close eye on Scout. One evening, as Henry and Scout returned home from a visit to the hospital, Henry noticed something unusual. The front gate of his apartment complex was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. His stomach tightened as he approached cautiously. "Stay close, Scout," he said, gripping the leash a little tighter. As they entered the complex, Henry scanned the area, his senses on high alert. Everything seemed normal until he reached his apartment door. The lock had been tampered with, the frame splintered slightly around the edges. Henry's heart raced as he quickly unlocked the door and stepped inside. Scout stayed close, his ears perked and his nose twitching. The apartment looked untouched at first glance, but as Henry moved further inside, he noticed small things out of place. A drawer left open, a picture frame slightly askew. Nothing appeared to be missing, but the intrusion left Henry shaken. He called the police, who arrived shortly after to investigate. The officers took his statement and inspected the damage, but without any clear evidence, there wasn't much they could do. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" one officer asked. Henry hesitated before answering. "There's someone who might have a grudge against me. A man named Rick. He's claimed my dog belongs to him, but I don't have proof that he's behind this." The officer nodded, jotting down the information. "We'll keep this on file. In the meantime, I'd recommend installing a security system and changing your locks." Henry thanked them and, once they left, immediately set to work securing his home. He installed a smart lock on the door, added cameras at the entrances, and even set up a motion-activated light outside. The measures gave him some peace of mind, but the incident left him more determined than ever to protect Scout. Despite the scare, Henry refused to let fear dictate his life. He and Scout continued their therapy visits, finding joy and meaning in their work. The bond they shared only grew stronger, and Scout's impact on others became even more evident with each visit. At the hospital, Scout formed a special connection with a young girl named Mia, who was undergoing treatment for a serious illness. Mia's parents told Henry that she had been withdrawn and sad since starting her treatments, but Scout's visits brought a spark of happiness to her days. One afternoon, as Scout lay beside Mia's hospital bed, the little girl stroked his fur and whispered, "You're my best friend, Scout." Henry felt a lump in his throat as he watched the interaction. Moments like this reminded him why their work was so important. Scout wasn't just a dog. He was a source of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still light to be found. As the seasons changed and the leaves turned golden, Henry reflected on how much his life had transformed since the day Scout had followed him home. The puppy who had once been scared and abandoned was now a beacon of love and resilience, touching lives wherever he went. Henry often thought about the path that had brought them together. If he hadn't taken that particular route home, if he hadn't decided to stop and give Scout a chance, his life would have remained the same. Quiet, predictable, and solitary. But Scout had changed everything, and Henry couldn't imagine life without him. One evening, as Henry sat on the couch with Scout curled up beside him, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Emily, inviting him and Scout to a fall festival at the park. The event promised food trucks, games, and activities for dogs, and Henry knew Scout would love it. The festival turned out to be even better than Henry had imagined. Scout eagerly explored the booths, sniffed at the hay bales decorating the paths, and even entered a costume contest. Dressed in a tiny cowboy outfit complete with a hat, Scout charmed the judges and won first place, earning a bag of treats and a shiny medal. Scout licked his face in response, his eyes shining with unconditional love. On New Year's Eve, Henry and Scout met Emily and Daisy at the park for a quiet celebration. They walked under the stars, their breath visible in the crisp night air. As the clock struck midnight, fireworks lit up the sky, and Scout barked excitedly at the colorful display. Emily turned to Henry, a soft smile on her face. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" she asked. Henry nodded, his gaze on Scout. "All the time. He changed everything." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "And you changed his world, too." Henry looked at her, his heart full. "I guess we saved each other." As they stood there, surrounded by the warmth of friendship and the promise of a new year, Henry felt a profound sense of gratitude. Scout had come into his life when he least expected it, bringing with him a love and purpose that Henry hadn't even realized he needed. Together, they faced the future with hope, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead.